always very difficult to say what something is about, especially when you've just finished writing it. But this book is called The Temporary Gentleman because this was a phrase given to young men who would be given a commission in the army for the duration of the Second World War, and indeed in the First World War. It arose largely because they wanted people, expert people who hadn't been in public schools necessarily and all the rest of it. So my grandfather, for instance, lived in Galway, and he had been to Africa, and he had been a district officer in Africa. He had a very good degree in engineering, and even though he was 37 when the war broke out, he was able to get a commission in the Royal Engineers. But it is a weighted and rather wonderful phrase, the temporary gentleman. I say my grandfather because the book, I have written about him before, I've written about his wife before. The book is a highly fictional recapturing of his dilemma and his life. I could say for the first time in my life I could actually say that the book is about love, about human love. I mean, I'm almost saying true human love, but not true love. Love as it appears to people when they get married. Some misfortune befalls them. I can see that I have a hesitation in me to say anything that would seem diminishing about either of these two characters. But if you were to describe them, let's say you describe them socially in Sligo of the time. Jack occupies a rather, actually in some ways, deliciously ambiguous place in Sligo society because he has turned himself into a professional man. But at the same time, his father was the tailor in the Sligo Lunatic Asylum, as it was then called. Indeed, his father met his mother over the cutting table. She was a seamstress. So they were making clothes for the patients, which is a lowly enough job when you think about it. I mean, in Jack's eyes. But he adores his father and mother, so that's some passage of value to him. His brother Ennius has foolishly joined the police in the period before independence, and he's being given a death threat, and he's left. He's gone. Jack's brother Tom, though, is the leader of the local dance band. And then there's this sense of inheritance and Delft in the house, in the father's house, and the weight of respectability. And the father sells insurance, and indeed, very, very discreetly in the summer, lodgers are brought into the house because it's in a seaside place, but there's no sign outside. Nevertheless, for Jack, this is just unimaginable grandeur. And it's probably part of the reason he wants to attach himself to May. Although, is that unfair to say? But anyway, there are many reasons for wanting. I suppose if you marry a royal person, it's not just because they're lovely, it might also be because they're a bit royal. So, and maybe he has an ambition to improve himself in the world. But I say all that, but then I realize that, after she died in the 50s, and she was young, she was 53, this man, like the real man behind the book, never married again. Women wanted to marry him, strangely enough, but he didn't want to be married because he just wanted to be married to her still. So, and even though there's a lot of complicated stuff there, and even though the last half of their marriage was like a war zone, and it was absolutely ghastly, and of course provided my mother and her siblings with a horrific childhood. Nevertheless, look at that. Very dangerous, but fascinating thing. Love keeping that clicked in. So despite everything you might say, I think they genuinely had an attachment to each other, a ferocious attachment to each other. And I think that's what characterizes them. and probably makes them ultimately inexplicable as a couple. There are some unpleasant things about being 58, but there are some interesting things as well. And one of them is that you've been working for 30 years and you realize you've been up to certain things that, properly unbeknownst to yourself almost. For instance, I wrote a sequence of what turned out to be sort of family plays in the 90s without quite meaning to. And that seemed to shift rather mysteriously and inconveniently in some ways into novel writing. And I wrote the book about his brother Ennius, The Whereabouts of Ennius MacNulty, I started in about 93, it was published in 98, because I simply couldn't write him as a play, because he was a very interior man. And as I write in long monologues on the stage, there was just empty pages, so that wasn't very good for a play. So I wrote him as a novel, and then that seemed to reach to the next one, which was Annie Dunn, which is, I have, on two sides of my family, I have Dunns and Barrys. So, and I use the name Dunn, but I don't use the name Barry, I use Kerwin or whatever. And O'Hara's is my mother family, they're MacNultys. So, without quite intending to, and now is this the 6th book of these? 3 of them are Dunns, 3 of them are MacNultys. So there's some sort of even mysterious symmetry going on. But sure, the supposedly non-existent God does work in mysterious ways. So all these books are now talking to each other in a funny sort of way. Also, because I get to them at 3-year periods, sometimes the ages are different, sometimes the events are different, sometimes things are a little bit other, and which I contentedly leave because I'm not slavishly trying to make connected work. Because things told in the hour that they're told will be told in a certain way, and to pretend that you have the spirit of another night in the telling would be wrong. So I don't know quite what to make of it myself. There they are, looking out. The huge task, I think, in it was to love them all. Because you can't write about people unless you adore them. And as a little boy, I did adore my grandfather Jack, for instance. I didn't know Ennius, obviously, he was long gone, and I knew Annie very well. I didn't know May, she was dead a couple of years before I was born. But even in the writing about them, even to reimagine them, I mean, how real May is to me, this woman that I never met. And my responsibility, because I know what they put my mother through, for instance, I could be possibly forgiven for hating them or just writing about them viciously. But that's not the task, and with all the books. And that has been better for me that it was so, because I don't know what sort of book you'd write unless you do it that way. But that's what makes it a bit hard, because your natural instincts might be otherwise. You've got to sort of rise above or beneath yourself. I can't quite work out what direction it should take.